Last week, we were joined by the University of Winchester Professor Eric Anderson. He headed up a group of academics who concluded that rugby in schools had become a form of child abuse, and they were calling for a complete ban of the sport for under 18s. It sparked massive debate. I mean, we get huge reaction on the show at the best of time, which pleases us. But this almost topped the lot. And so much so, we thought we need to keep in touch with the professor, and we need to get balance in this as well. So this morning, Professor Eric Anderson joins us live in studio, and he's joined by a man I know very well, former England Rugby international Ugo Monye. And we're going to take the conversation that bit further. And as we speak, you're coming in with messages. Now, I'm seeing the messages, Simon, in front of me. You no doubt are as well. 81089 for those. Before we even utter a word on this topic. Good morning, Jim and Simon. My 10-year-old son suffered a traumatic brain injury playing contact rugby. He spent months learning to walk again and was in incredible pain for months. He was a very good player, being player of the year at his club. Contact is not safe. This needs to be a genuine discussion this morning about child safety. Parents need to know that they can say no to contact. Professor Anderson, this has touched a nerve, hasn't it? I know the reaction you've had has been immense, hasn't it?
Absolutely immense, and surprisingly quite positive compared to what we were expecting. Now, I've been at this a long time, about 15 years now. I've been moved from the terrain of being ostracized and stigmatized for my propositions to now within the mainstream. The fact that I'm here today highlights that the bevy of research that's come out, that's hit the press over the years, has started to change our cultural understandings. The research is now absolutely conclusive. It is no longer contestable that there are multiple forms of brain trauma that can occur from both one-off concussions, but also, and more insipidly, it's the drip, drip, drip of repetitive head injuries from daily tackling.
I think it was the language you used that surprised many. Surprised us.
Yes.
I must admit. I mean, and Simon came round to your way of thinking. Simon's going to come in obviously in a second. But you concluded that rugby in schools has become a form of child abuse and should be banned among under 18s. Expand on that for us.
Yeah, so the first thing we're doing
is
child abuse. And we're going to define that according to existing British law. The 1989 and the 2004 Children's Act calls for the protection and the safety of children. Within school systems, the Education Act of 2002 says children shall not be intentionally injured or endangered. The United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, which we are a signature to, says that children need to be protected from injury even if the parents disagree. The Sport in England Safeguarding and Protection Policy, the Offences Against the Person Act of 1861. All of these acts very clearly state that a child shall not be intentionally injured. So the question is this, and I said this before last week, I'll say it again. And let me also highlight before I say that I'm not just talking rugby here. We're talking high impact sports. So let's look at boxing again and say, how is it that a child being strict outside or hit in the head outside of sport is child abuse, particularly if it's by an adult, right? But in the boxing ring, I can put a child into a boxing ring with a trained fighter where they can sustain multiple hits, including a knockout, which is traumatic brain injury, and yet that's not child abuse, that's sport. So our argument here is no. In both situations, the intent is to harm a child's brain, and therefore it is child abuse.
The intent is to harm a child's brain.
The intent.
Sports organisations, you claim, are in fact grooming adults to ignore consequences. You stand by that?
Well, let me tell you what the CEO...
Grooming adults.
Let me tell you what the CEO of Rugby England said in 2020 to a Guardian article. He said, and I'm going to quote it for you specifically because, any of your callers can absolutely Google this, right? Just Google Bill Sweeney. He said, our evidence shows that rugby is no more dangerous than other sports. No more dangerous than cross-country running. Now, this is an absolute bold-faced lie. We have known about CTE for 15 years.
On what basis?
On what basis of what?
On that quote.
His quote is that Rugby Football Union is no more dangerous than any other sport.
But that can be compartmentalised into so many different things. I think what he's referring to, Bill Sweeney, CEO of English Rugby, in terms of head acceleration events, something which we touched upon last week. So when you compare, especially in young adults, which is the focus of our conversation today, between 13 and 18, we spoke about it last week. In terms of HAEs, head acceleration events, 86% of people that were studied and measured last year, they found that they were less likely to get a head acceleration event than you are to run, jump, or skip.
There's absolutely no truth to
that's
that
a fact.
whatsoever.
No, that's
that is, what research are you referring to?
That's a fact and a study. And after this, I can send you that study.
No, let's do it now because we're on air with the listeners who need proper academic research.
I'm not on here to try and fiddle anyone. I'm not even on here to be absolutely right. The only thing that I'm on here is to supply people with the right information. That is it.
Are you telling the audience that children running receive the same head acceleration injuries as playing tackle rugby?
What I'm saying is you're more likely to get more head acceleration events, running, jumping, skipping, and trampoline and gymnastics as you are, especially we're talking young adults. You can't compare the elite game.
Up to how many G-force?
Sorry?
Up to how many G-force?
I couldn't tell you the exact G-force.
Okay, so what you're doing here is you don't know this research. You come on national air
that is not
to
true.
Mislead people about the acceleration events.
No, you misled people. You misled people.
Decades
and you need
of research.
I know there's decades of research, and I'll tell you what.
You can't name a single study. I've got studies from the British Medical Journal, sponsored by the Rugby Football Union themselves. You're telling the audience.
Is there any context? Is there any context?
The context is very simple.
I haven't finished the question, so you don't know.
Go on, Tom.
Is there any context to the observation that Bill Sweeney has made? Because I do disagree with some of the language that you use. I don't think the intention of rugby is injury. I think it's a consequence of rugby. So when you specifically compartmentalise it into the intention in boxing, absolutely, it's a difficult argument to push back on because the intention of boxing is to injure somebody. The intention of rugby is to overcome the opposition, and the consequence of it may well be injury. So I think I'd pick you up on language there. As far as child abuse is concerned, I understand it's a definable thing in law, but in society, most people think child abuse is inflicting something over a child that they absolutely don't want themselves. So when we talk about child abuse, you've gone to the legal evaluation of it, but when we think about the societal perspective of it, you've used robust language. And I know why you've used it, because it concentrates the mind. It gets people engaged, and of course you're going to get a robust response to that. But the Bill Sweeney situation, I think it would be, he's not a foolhardy man, and I don't think he's in the business of misrepresenting or being divisive, because it's clearly evident, and rugby has its own challenges about class actions being brought against the sport, because in certain sports they don't want to admit these things are industry injuries because they become part of a compensation culture that the sports do not want. But I'd like to know the context of Bill Sweeney, rather than an isolated quote, the nuance and context for him to turn around and deny that there are challenges, because the sport knows there are challenges and the sport's embracing those challenges. So I think it's slightly unfair, unless you're going to give the full context to what Bill Sweeney said, just to take it in isolation.
I think the best thing then do is to allow your readers to Google Guardian article, Bill Sweeney, 2020.
No, but you're missing the point, the context of it. It's the context of it, is terms of what Bill Sweeney's talking about. We're focused on the brain, aren't we?
The context
and head
is
acceleration
quite
events. No, because you've taken a headline and you've
this is
missed
not a headline.
the context.
It's a quote from an entire article where he's dismissing the injuries in rugby.
No, he's not. No one is dismissing the risk in rugby.
When you say that they are the same as all other sports, that defies common knowledge.
With regards to head acceleration events.
Ugo, we're going to go round and round on this.
No, we don't have to.
But also he's talking about
the context.
There's two different arguments. He's talking about the participation in elite sports. You're talking about your concerns about a certain age group and the reality of that reaction. So if you're going to take if you're saying Bill Sweeney was referencing under 18s in that conversation, then I would probably take you to question on that. I would imagine Bill Sweeney was talking about rugby in its elite form rather than necessarily the context in which you're seeking to frame it.
Yeah.
All right, I'll tell you what. You want more evidence?
The fact of the matter remains, Ugo, Eric says that he and other academics have concluded that rugby in schools has become a form of child abuse.
Yeah,
and that is what's made you sit up and say, I've got to defend my sport.
Yeah, 100%, because I think you're trivialising social matters that have been aligned with those words, that massively undermines it. When you think
Undermines
about
what?
When you think of the word child abuse and you've hijacked that word to leverage it against... Yes, of course you have.
Hijacked.
Yes, absolutely.
I could put you in touch with so many mothers who have lost children to permanent diseases, people who are suffering
We
from
could do that
CTE.
across all sport.
No, you can't.
No,
CTE
you can.
is not found in distance runners. It's only found in impact sport athletes. So do not stand here and tell me that CTE is a result of anything other than impact sport athletes.
I didn't say CTE, but I can find...
And CTE is a form of dementia that hits
Eric,
people
we're going to
early
take a quick
and
break.
hard.
Many people getting involved in the debate at the moment. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back. There's one though, Baz here. Tell Eric, Jim, I'm not trying to contradict what he's saying here, but it wasn't rugby. I played ice hockey from the age of 10 to 18. That was my choice. If you can choose not to do it, but I chose to do it. I've broken every bone in my body and I've lost teeth, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Ugo, basically, are the RFU in the game of rugby not already moving to limit risk, in your view? What do you know of what's going on behind the scenes in this area?
Yeah, forever we're trying to keep and I guess stick to what we've said in terms of keeping player safety absolutely paramount. We saw last week, round one of the Six Nations, we've got instrumented mouthguards which are able to detect in real time the amount of G-forces that go through players' heads. We saw last weekend, the second round of Six Nations, a player been removed because of that detection, which gets sent across to a signal to an independent doctor. The player itself was like, he was baffled. What's going on?
It's the Scotland hooker, George
Yes,
Turner.
that's it. It was baffled. He got taken off the pitch. We're doing more and more and more. Next month, we're meeting up as a group of people. So that'll be tournament owners, Six Nations, Rugby Championship, Premiership Rugby, URC, and everyone else. Head coaches, international coaches from around the world, referees, International Rugby Players Association, all those bodies congregate and come together with this in mind. It's all about shaping our game. What does it want to be? What does it want to look like? And how can we then create, whether it's administering the laws even more so or changing the laws to protect the players even more so? I don't know if there's another sport in the world that has that level of buy-in to sit live together multiple times every single year to try and protect our players from themselves and from others.
Now, Eric, that
You're
must
gonna
be
have
music
to
to
give
your
me
ears.
time. No, not at all. Because what he's describing,
Not at all.
That's not
Not
music
at
to your ears.
First of all,
That we
you are
come
only-
together to
Guys,
try and...
calm,
So-
Ugo, calm, please. Let me
Just
speak,
interesting.
please. He is talking about the adult game. He's talking about the professional game. He's not talking
No,
about
I'm not.
children's game.
No, don't put words in my mouth.
Ugo,
We literally...
Ugo,
Ugo, in fairness,
do
that is
do
what
we
you
have these
described.
mouth guards
You
in
described all the
schools
incidents in the
rugby
elite
right
game.
now? We do not. We do not have these sophisticated mouth guards. But let me highlight something else. What he's saying, and that player that was pulled off the pitch, is because he hit a 70 G hit. A 40-mile-an-hour car crash
you know
is a
that?
40 G hit. Yes, you do. That's the threshold for pulling him off, and that
No, but
that
it's
is the
not.
threshold. What's the threshold? How many Gs?
20.
It's not 20. No, it's 7.
Okay, so you asked me a
Either
question,
way,
I've
20,
answered it.
20
You
or 70,
disagree.
right? The point
But
is,
Eric,
No,
the
there's a
tackle,
massive
point is-
difference.
Ugo,
the
let-
tackle
guys,
height in rugby, the
guys,
tackle height
guys, you've
in
got to let me
community
finish
rugby
this.
has been changed.
you've got to let me finish this.
Go on.
The idea of a gum shield is that we detect a level of impact to a head that is so dangerous, we need to pull them off the pitch, because if they get another hit to the head, they could die. What I want to do is prevent children from being hit in the head in the first place. I don't want to talk about professional rugby today, because that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about children. Yes, you could put gum shields in children. Yes, recognize and remove. Yes, but both of those happen after a child has taken a seriously high velocity impact to the head. That's what we need to discuss. You can talk about making rugby safer by changing the tackle height. And the Rugby Football Union has gone up and down, up and down. I've been doing media all over the world. They're tackling for children at different heights. The reality is this: you cannot have two children running at each other or in some vicinity of each other and tackle and prevent the brain from smacking into the skull. The more pressure, the bigger those players, the faster those players, the more the brain will hit and bounce around.
But what you've
we
described
need
is
to
illegal.
stop that in children.
But what you've described is illegal. So you know the tackle height, and that's been reduced. And so when you say that we congregate as an elite sector of stakeholders within the game, and we're just talking about the elite game, that's utter nonsense. We speak about grassroots all the way through to greats. The very reason why the tackle height was actually reduced in the community game was because of the discussions that we have. The community game can't change a law on behalf of themselves, but they can change it when you have the CEOs from all the different unions who change it. The things you're describing about a little boy or a little girl run into another little boy or little girl and get smacked in the head is illegal. We know
no, stop that, Ugo. You do. Absolutely
as
know.
A law,
you do not, Ugo.
As a law, it's illegal.
Let me ask you: are you going to tell the listeners that the only way that the brain deaccelerates in a tackle is if it's head to head?
No,
are you saying
I know that as a fact, but when you said
anytime the
what
brain
are you
stops.
saying, Ugo?
Yeah, what are you saying here, buddy?
I'm just using your words, which you said. When a little boy or girl runs into someone, gets hit in the head, is what you said.
The brain is hit inside the head, regardless of where the body stops.
Let Ugo finish that. Say
I
it again,
can
Ugo.
only quote, you said a little boy or girl gets hit in the head. We know that action's illegal. I know you can get head acceleration events if you hit someone underneath your ribs and you can get that sense of whiplash, of course. What we try and do is mitigate against all the risk. Also, for your point about banning contact and tackling in under 13s through to under 18s, there's also a study which suggests that if you ban it and then introduce it later in life, you're actually more likely to get potentially injured. At under 30,
oh my God!
No.
Let's guys. I'm going to need a bit of time.
Am I allowed to finish?
We've got time.
The problem is it's 2 or 3.
Ugo, finish your point.
My point is, at under 13, where they're smaller, where they're actually not as fast, where they're not as agile, where the contacts aren't as severe, is a far greater time to be learning how to tackle in a controlled manner than it is at 18, where you've potentially been to the gym, you've put on size, the force are greater. If you've not actually been able to condition the body and then you introduce it at a later stage, you might be exposing boys and girls to a greater risk of injury.
So you're arguing, Ugo, that research is being done and work is being done to ensure the impact is much lessened, whereas Eric, you're arguing for a complete and outright ban.
So listen to this. Mothers, listen to this. The Rugby Football Union's own research published just this month shows that there's 4.8 concussions per 1,000 hours of playing for under 13s. It does rise as they get older. 17-year-olds have about 1 concussion per 100 hours of playing. Now, but it is not just concussion we're talking about. We are talking about the drip of repetitive head injuries, these subconcussive injuries, right? Now, here's what we know. For every 2.6 years of play in American football, one doubles their chances of the form of dementia known as CTE. That form of dementia hits harder and earlier, and it is found only in team sport athletes and some military soldiers. It is not found in the general population. We know
you can't compare American football to rugby, though.
You can, because rugby has 4 or more times the concussion rate. Because let's be honest, rugby players are proper athletes.
Yes,
they're out there for 80 minutes. They're out there for 80 minutes.
You can't hit the head
defense,
in rugby. You can
you
in
don't
American
hit the head
football.
in American football either. They're out there for 80 minutes. You're not intense. Head-to-head contact is prohibited in American football.
Okay, so we don't see that.
Point is, when you look at concussions per 1,000 hours, rugby has 4 or 5 times more concussions per 1,000 hours than American football. Now, rugby players are out there playing both sides for 80 minutes, so that's one of the reasons why. So there is absolutely no reason, no rationale, no theory to suggest that Rugby Football Union players will have less CTE than NFL players, which mathematical computation shows have 60% chance of developing CTE. And there are now 525 former professional athletes, over 300 rugby players, suing the Rugby Football Union for this disease. The longer one plays the game, the more likely one is to develop this.
I agree with that.
When you tell me that they will learn to have fewer injuries if they play younger, there is such a massive dropout rate from rugby that what we need to do is prevent children from playing them, so the vast majority of children don't have that impact, and those who do go on reduce their years of impact as they play.
Many people are getting in touch, Simon, saying, I'm with the professor, but I'm also with Ugo.
Yeah.
And it's actually something to behold, because both of you are making your point so well that we don't want to mess up in the time we've got left. What's the difference, Professor, between CTE and concussion?
Great, fantastic question. I think parents really need to know this one particularly. We know that a concussion is a one-off event that we call traumatic brain injury. And that happens when the brain deaccelerates from being hit or accelerates from being hit or tackled or in a car accident. And most people are familiar with the symptoms of it, right? So sickness, nausea, etc. We know from twin studies in Sweden of matched twins that one serious concussion can lead to lifelong issues, higher reliance upon the state, higher rates of criminality, depression, suicide, etc. Concussion is bad news. And that is what most of the knowledge of tackle sports and fight sports and combat sports gets. But there's another scarier disease out there that could hit people and does hit people who've never had concussion. It only happens in athletes that take high impact or soldiers. And it is a cumulative effect of multiple hits hitting the brain, subconcussive hits, some are probably in the 10G and up range, over and over again, that leads to this form of dementia that has high rates of depression, high rates of alcoholism and violence. And it is found only in impact sport athletes. And what we know is for every 2.6 seasons of play, granted for American football players, American youth football, you double your chances of acquiring this disease.
Ugo, do you recognize that? Do you identify with what he's just said?
Yeah, 100%. It's hard to dispute with any of the statistics which you've given there. And do you know what? And I like the way you've characterised this conversation, because for me, it's truly not about trying to be right. It's about getting the right information out there. I'm so aware of a lot of what you said. I guess the conclusion is that just trying to operate and find a middle ground, because when you look at the risk, when you look at the rewards, and actually with a helicopter view as what sport can serve and how it can support and serve so many different communities and different individuals, I do think there is a way.
Ugo, do you agree with Stocksy in Nottingham, who says, I'm listening, it's fascinating. As with any contact sport, there's always risk of injury, and some have more risk than others in terms of head injury. But I've got to agree with the professor. Putting your child into a situation where they might be seriously injured or suffer with a brain-damaging injury later in life, unfortunately, is as bad as child abuse. The solution, touch sport, touch rugby. At the age of 16, 18, you can then let the individual make his own choice.
That's what we already do.
That's what you do.
Every introduction is touch rugby.
You accept that, Professor?
No. Wait, are you telling me 12-year-olds don't tackle?
They get introduced, but
I understand there's a gradation period in, but my children in school were playing, not my children, but children were playing tackle rugby. They learn the skills first, but from age year 4, they're tackling.
So you've not only interrupted me, you've just repeated what I've said. Everyone's introduction into the game is through touch rugby.
Yes, but how long is that introduction?
Do you know what? It's not even a definitive way. So up until a period, they want to then introduce tackling. If that feels like it's dangerous or compromised, they then move back to touch rugby. All those guidelines on rfu.com's website. So every single coach can manage it without actually being told, well, after 6 months, do this and do that. So everyone's introduction into it, how long they stay at that period, is very much up to the players and up to the coaches.
Guys, we can't go against our word by getting the odd caller to air. Danny, I'm not saying you're odd in any way, but there's so many people trying to call us. We've selected you, Danny. Come to air, put your point. The professor's here, Ugo's here. You're a referee, right? What do you want to say?
Yeah, morning, gents. And this has been a fascinating topic of conversation and something that we as match officials have had over many years. So if I go to the report first that was published in 2020, since that time, steps have been put in place from World Rugby through to the RFU to the WRU as such to reduce the likelihood of head contact and head injury. And that is now in place. As of the 1st of July this year, all adult rugby to a certain position as such, through down to child age grade rugby, when they start tackling, now is lowered to the base of the sternum in open play. Now, that doesn't take away the tackling aspect fully, and people will still get hurt. But from us as match officials, we are seeing less head contact during the game. Now, I referee adult rugby, men and women.
Yep.
I also do age grade rugby as well. And there are good techniques out there that the coaches are giving to the players. Sometimes people get it wrong and they do get a head knock. However, we are seeing less head contact.
Less head contact, Danny. That's a good point.
That's
Eric,
very good.
Eric, that's good to hear
really good.
from Danny.
That's really good to hear. I like to hear that. But let's shift this conversation to an area where you probably will all agree. and that's another middle ground we can talk about, and that's schools PE. Because in my Freedom of Information requests on over 200 schools throughout England, you do the math, 75% are playing tackle rugby in schools PE, where they are compelling children to play against their will, where children don't even have a choice.
Sorry, 75% of how many schools?
Published research, 288. 288
across
schools,
England.
random select across England. We
And
didn't do
kids don't have a
Scotland.
say in it.
You get the idea. Kids don't have a say. Now it's part of schools PE. So can we find another middle ground? Because what Ugo is saying is that children who are really attracted to rugby, there's a community game, and that's what he's speaking to. Mm-hmm. But in schools PE, we are playing tackle rugby, and children are getting hurt at high rates in the name of physical education. So can we all agree, I'm sure Ugo would agree with this, that for schools PE, it should be touch, not tackle?
You agree, Ugo?
No, I don't. No, I actually don't. So if you were to say to me that matches at its infancy should perhaps be modified slightly, but in terms of training, and it's not actually just training as an umbrella word, it's actually the amount of time that you spend training. And that's why we're collating so much evidence at the moment to understand at what point, after how many minutes, a player's at risk.
As we conclude this today, but one thing stands out to me, it seems all too obvious to suggest it. You prepared to work alongside Professor Anderson going forward.
And we do. We don't want to live in an echo chamber where we're just getting information that just cements the views that we have. We want to bring people in, and it might not be you.
I've not heard from the RFU.
Well, just because they've not heard from you, because you might not be the oracle.
No, but Eric, here's a former international player saying, yes, you've a point, let's work together.
And I sit on so many of these boards and have so many of these conversations. We don't want to be a closed society and live in this holy huddle.
Compromise.
I would be delighted to be invited to sit in.
Can I give you one piece of
Absolutely.
advice?
Ugo, I've been at this over a decade.
I know.
Probably
and I'll
don't
tell
need
you
your
what.
advice.
Okay, well, there we go.
My advice would be to say, don't compel children to play this in schools.
Understood. But Ugo, have the last word then.
Every year for the last 15 years, the week before the Six Nations, someone comes out with inflammatory language, and as you have this year, just to grab attentions, to be able to have conversations like this. And whilst you may have got the publicity that you want, I think you perhaps... but you have. You sat on
this
national radio
isn't just
right
to
now.
grab attention. This is to save children's brains, Ugo.
Attention to be
this
able
is
to
to save
what
children's
you do.
brains.
But
If I use the media wisely, you're not going to complain.
Do you regret...
Have I used the media wisely?
Do you regret...
It would appear so.
I'm here.
But have you also tapped it
language?
right? As Ugo says, you picked your moment, didn't you?
I
just before the Six
absolutely
Nations
did.
started.
Exactly.
And you know what?
Some of the language you used?
Of course that was deliberate.
Do you regret some of the language you used?
I absolutely do not regret.
Child abuse.
I find it
hostage,
appalling
grooming.
that you think children should be compelled to play tackle rugby in schools PE, or even made to play it, even if it's by choice, because we don't need it in schools PE.
Guys, going forward, I think the two of you are going to work together, right?
I don't think so.
I think that could be productive.
No, because he's so stubborn. I'm open to listening. You're the one who's appalled at
Professor
this and
Eric
that.
Anderson, I want to thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here,
You
guys.
can tell by the reaction that we have had, this has been a more than relevant topic for us to expand upon here on our show. And we're delighted that you chose our show to join us upon. Ugo, as always, thanks, my friend.
Thank you.
You stood up to this fella. And I think going forward, the two of you can remain in communication, because I think it's vitally important. I think it's almost too obvious to say. Okay, thanks so much for both of you joining us today. You can do it.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.